I'm Martin Green, and I'm going to show you some of the tools that Excel has for what-if analysis. What-if analysis is a technique that's used widely in business to try and predict what might happen if certain circumstances prevailed. For example, what would happen if we increased our selling price? What if our sales increased or decreased? What would happen if the interest rate on our loan increased or decreased? And to demonstrate these particular tools, I'm going to use a fairly simple example that most people can relate to, and that is of a loan from a lender such as a bank at a particular interest rate over a particular time. To do that, I'm going to use the Pmt function provided by Excel, and I've already set out on my spreadsheet here an outline for the information that we need. First of all, how much do we want to borrow? What's the prevailing interest rate? How long do we want to borrow it for? And here we're going to calculate how much we will have to repay each month. Now, the Pmt function is quite a widely used one, and you'll find it on the Formulas tab in the usual place. Go to the Insert Function tool, and it's under my most recently used list, but you can find it by looking through the alphabetical list. I'm going to select it here, and here we are, a description of the function. It calculates the payment for a loan based on constant payments at a constant interest rate. So I'm just going to click OK. Now here are the arguments that the function requires. First of all, the rate. And I'm using an annual interest rate. And to start with, I've chosen 6.8%, which is what is current at the moment. So I'm clicking on that cell, and notice that I'm putting the cell reference into the box here rather than the actual rate itself. That means that if we change the rate in the cell, our calculation will automatically update itself. Now, in addition to putting that cell reference in, I'm going to divide by 12, and that's because it's an annual interest rate, but we're calculating repayments on a monthly basis. The next argument is the number of payments. Again, because we're doing it monthly, I've started off with a value of 60, so that's 60 months. So I'm putting that cell reference in there. And the next one is the present value. Present value is essentially the amount of money that you want to borrow. I like to put that in as a negative amount. The reason for that is that the repayments then show as positive amounts. So I'm typing a minus sign and then putting in the cell reference for the cell that's got my loan amount in it. Now, you'll notice that the three arguments that I've already supplied here are marked here in bold, and that's because they're obligatory. You'll have to supply them. The next two are optional, and I'm not going to supply those because they're not relevant to what I'm doing at the moment, but I will tell you what they are. FV is future value. Now, that is relevant if you are, for example, reducing a debt from one amount to another. Maybe you owe £10,000 and you want to reduce it to £5,000. Although you're repaying just the difference between those two numbers, you are actually paying interest on the full amount. So that's why that's relevant. The final one is type, which is whether or not the repayment is made at the beginning of the month or at the end of the month. And normally we repay at the end of the month, which is the default, so I don't need to put anything in there. You can see over here that Excel has already worked out the result, and it'll insert that onto the spreadsheet when I click OK. So there we are. If I borrow £20,000, that's 6.8% over 60 months, it's going to cost me £394.14 a month. Okay, what if I decide that maybe I can't afford that, but I can afford £350 a month? What are my options? Well, it's unlikely that I can negotiate a different interest rate, although I could look at different lenders who might be offering different interest rates. It's more likely that I can decide to borrow a small amount of money or repay that same amount of money over a longer period. So how do I work that out? Well, Excel has got a very useful tool called the Goal Seek tool, which allows me to do that. And you find that on the Data tab. We go to What If Analysis and choose Goal Seek. Now the Goal Seek tool allows you to set a particular cell to a certain value by changing the value in another cell. So we want this cell, the one with our repayment amount in, to be set to 350, which is the maximum that I can afford. That cell has already been inserted here because I happen to have it selected when I open the Goal Seek tool. I'm going to tell it that I want it to set it to that amount, 350, by changing one of the other cells that has an input into this formula. I'm going to choose to ask it to change the loan amount. So I'll click in this cell here and on loan amount. And when I click OK, it'll work the Pmt function backwards, if you like, to achieve that value of 350. There we are, it's arrived at a value, and it's telling me that I can borrow 17,760 at that same interest rate and over that same term if I want the repayments to be £350. If I'm happy with that, I just click OK here. But what if I want to try something else? I might say, no, I need that 20,000. Maybe I can borrow it over a longer period of time. So I'll cancel that dialog box. Now I'll ask for it again. This time I'll set the same cell to 350, but this time I'll ask it to change the term. And it's arrived at an answer which is just over 69 months. So you can see that this is a very useful tool, but it's only answering one question at a time. What if I'd like to ask that a whole number of different times for different circumstances? And what if I want to see the combinations of different terms and different loan amounts? And we have another tool that will do that for us, and that's called the data table. Here's how it works. The first thing I have to do is to set a reference to the original formula. And I'm going to do that by clicking on a cell where I want my data table to start, just typing an equals sign, and clicking on the cell where I wrote my original Pmt function. When I press enter, I get the same value, of course. I'll look at different amounts of money. Maybe I'll start at 15,000 and I'll go up in increments of £1,000, and I'm going to use the autofill tool to do this and take it up to £30,000. I'll just format those values so that we can see what we're talking about. And in order to create our data table, I need to draw a rectangle around the cells that I've just put information in. Now, note how I laid out the data there. My column of variables here, so this variable amount refers to the loan amount up here in the original formula, and that is one row down and one column to the left of my reference value here. Now, having laid that out and selected this rectangle, I go to the Data tab and to What If Analysis and ask for a data table. Data tables can be of two kinds. You can have a single variable data table and a two variable data table. Well, in this example, I have a single variable, which is the loan amount. So I only need to supply one of these pieces of information. And with a single variable data table, you arrange your variable in a column. So the information it requires is called the column input cell, and what you must tell it is the cell in the original calculation that is equivalent to your variable here, and that of course is the loan amount cell. When I click OK, it creates the data table, and you can see it's done those calculations for all the different loan amounts. And again, I'll just format those so that you can read them easily. What if I wanted to look at a combination of two different variables? And here I can look at combinations of loan amount and term, for example. I do that in a similar way. I start off by setting a reference to the original calculation. I need my column of variables, so rather than type them out again, I'm just going to copy and paste. But this time, my column of variables needs to go directly underneath the original reference. I'll set out the second variable in a row immediately to the right of the reference. I'll start off with 36 months and go up in increments of 12 because that will be years, and I'll use the autofill tool to help me. I'll take it up to 10 years. And again, I select a rectangle that encloses all that data. On the Data tab, I'll go to What If Analysis and Data Table. And this time I need to supply both bits of information. Now this time I have a row of variables. So my row input cell is the cell in the original formula. That's equivalent to the variable here, which is the term variable, which is this cell. And the column input cell is, as before, the loan amount. And OK, and it's filled in that entire block of cells. And I'll just format those again. So you can see I've saved myself an awful lot of experimentation with the goal seek tool, and I worked out all those values in just a few clicks of the mouse using the data table. Now, one more thing to show you here is a way of formatting that data so that it becomes easier to understand. And I'm going to use a kind of formatting called conditional formatting, where the formatting of the cells will actually change depending upon what the value in the cell is. I want to format these cells here. Now, if you look at the values in these cells, they run from 172 right up to 923. And I said earlier on that I was interested in something that would cost me about £350. So supposing I say that I'm interested in repayments that fall within the range of 300 to 350. And I'd like to see those quite clearly here in this block of data, and it's quite difficult to see them at the moment, but you can make it really easy using conditional formatting. Let's take a look. I've selected the cells that I want to format. I'll go to the conditional formatting tool, which is on the Home tab, and I'm going to choose Highlight Cells, and to start with, greater than. Now, if the cells are greater than 350, I'm not really interested in those because I can't afford them. So you tell it what your limit is, and here there are a number of choices of how those cells are going to be formatted. I'm going to choose the default here, which is light red fill with dark red text, but you can see they've also given us yellow and green and a couple of other examples, and in fact you can create your own custom format which can be anything you like. I'm going to select that one and click OK, and you'll see that it's already formatted all those cells which currently have a value exceeding 350, and it's formatted them in red. Now with the same cells selected, I'm going to add another condition. This time less than. Now I'm interested in values between 300 and 350, so if it's less than 300, I'm not really interested, although I can afford it, so I'm going to format those yellow. And OK. And finally, the ones that are in the range, I'm going to go to between 300 and 350, and I'm going to format those ones green because those are the ones that I'm interested in. Okay, now it's still selected, so it looks a bit dull, but if I click somewhere else, you'll see that now it's very clear which values are the ones that I'm interested in. Anything between 16,000 over 60 months and 30,000 over 120 months. Now the great thing about conditional formatting is that when the value shown in the cells changes, then the formatting changes accordingly. So we've already looked at a variable term and a variable loan amount. The only other variable here is the interest rate. So I'm going to change that. I'm actually going to change it by quite a large amount so you can see the change here on the screen. I'm going to say, well, what would those repayments be if maybe we had a 10% interest rate? Now, I know that's a big change, but I want you to be able to see it quite clearly on the screen. So as soon as I make that change, watch the cells that are coloured green. Now notice that the area that was coloured green moved into the upper right corner of the table, meaning that I can either borrow a smaller amount or I have to borrow over a longer time in order to repay the same amount. Let's change that interest rate again. Let's take it to 5% and watch where the green area moves to. This time it moved in the opposite direction, meaning that I could either borrow over a shorter time or I could borrow a larger amount. And so there's an infinite amount of variation there available to me, and it's all very clear to see thanks to the conditional formatting. Finally, I'm just going to show you a tool which is much underused in Excel, and it's really useful, and that's the Format Painter. Now, I spent a little while formatting these cells here, and now I'd like to format these cells in exactly the same way, but I don't want to have to go through all those steps. It's very easy to do with the Format Painter. First of all, I select any cell that has got the format that I want. I'll go and click the Format Painter tool. Now what that does is copy the formatting of that cell. And then I paint that formatting over the cells that I want to paste it into, and there we are. Job done. The cells that are less than 300 are yellow, greater than 350 are red, and in between they're green, just like over here, because it has exactly the same formatting applied. Okay, we've taken a look at the Pmt function, the goal seek tool, two different kinds of data tables, conditional formatting, and the format painter. If you'd like a free PDF handout of this particular tutorial, go to my Office Tips website at www.fontstuff.com and you can download it from there.